Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. How could a child die weeks before his own death? Find out on Murder Mile. Today I'm standing on Woking Close in Roehampton, SW15. 3 streets south of the cuckooed flat of William Alger. 4 streets east of the drowned body of Dorothy Kozlowski. And 3 streets west of the teacher who loved detention a little too much. Coming soon to Murder Mile. Woking Close is a small U-shaped road surrounded by 16 identical brown brick council blocks for some of the area's neediest residents. With most of its spare space taken up by transit vans, hot hatches and stolen line bikes, its children are often stuck playing on a microscopic patch of brown grass strewn with weeds, dog shit and car parts. Even though just over the wall at Roehampton Golf Course lies 100 acres of lush greenery reserved for a handful of old, middle-class, tax-dodging codgers in garish sweaters. It could, of course, be turned into a playground. But it won't be, as I'm guessing that the town's councillor is a regular golfer. Of course, playtime is vital for dealing with stress, not just for children, but for their parents and guardians, as it eases tensions which arise during the day and soothes them both with a peaceful sleep at night. But not for everyone. In the early hours of Tuesday the 27th of August 2019, in an unnamed flat on Woking Close, 15-month-old Jacob Lennon was lying in his cot and dreaming innocent dreams. Like every child, he was small, fragile, and needed protection from life's dangers. But whereas many children are shielded by the very worst of predators, like drunks, junkies, and paedophiles, there is one person who is every child's nightmare. My name is Michael. I'm your tour guide, and this is Murder Mile. Episode 309, Every Child's Nightmare. This story begins and ends with every parent's greatest fear: a sick and injured child. The night of Tuesday the 27th of August 2019 was uncomfortably hot, as a mini heatwave had made the nights sticky. In the bedroom he shared with his 4-year-old brother, 15-month-old Jacob lay in his cot, restless as he was recovering from a fever. And down the hall in their bed, 31-year-old Louise Lennon, his mother, lay beside her boyfriend of 3 months, Jacob Drummond, who wasn't the boy's father. Jake told the police,
"I woke about 6 a.m. I heard a bang and a little squeal. When I jumped up, Louise was awake, wide awake.
As a father of 2 girls,
It was my parents' instinct. When you hear a bang and you know there's a kid next door, you run and check on them. It was a whingy squeal, the type that would scare you, like you'd wake up and you'd think, oh, that doesn't sound right."
So we went in to check. Only Jacob wasn't in his cot, but face down on the floor.
I started seeing his lips turn blue, and that's when I put my hands in his throat to make sure that he wasn't swallowing his tongue. His nose had loads of sick coming out of it. I turned him onto his side. I put my hand in his mouth to make sure his airway was clear. I was heaving from the sick, but I had to try my best to save him. I just couldn't sit there.
Crying as she gave evidence in court, Louise recalled, "I woke as Jake brought him into the bedroom. He was holding him like he was serving to me, not holding his head. Jacob was looking all floppy and unconscious, and Jake was saying, 'Babe, babe, call an ambulance.'" At 6:02 a.m, Louise called the emergency services in panic.
999, which service do you require?
An ambulance. My baby's been sick. His lips are turning blue and he's not breathing. Stating that they heard a bump when he fell out of bed. He's been like this for about 5 or 10 minutes. The dispatcher instructed Jake to perform CPR on Jacob.
He told me, lay him flat on his back, tilt his head up, and give him 30 compressions on his chest. I might have messed it up a little, but that's because I was in shock.
Later telling the police that
the 10 minutes I was giving Jacob CPR felt like a lifetime.
At 6:09 a.m., just 7 minutes after the call, Jake recalled,
when paramedics turned up, I was clearing the airways of sick.
But Jacob was already cold, lifeless, and in cardiac arrest. Rushed to St. George's Hospital in Tooting, the paediatric team fought to save his life. But Jacob was declared dead at 7:22 a.m. Jacob Lennon died that day, and yet his death had begun barely 3 months before. His mother, Louise Jane Lennon, was born in August 1990, and as the daughter of Anthony and Caroline, she lived in Wandsworth all of her life. But little is known about her upbringing, as she doesn't appear in any papers, and everything she posted online has since been deleted. In 2015, she gave birth to her first son. She never married. She lived off benefits. And in March 2018, her second son Jacob was born healthy and happy. But he was far from safe from any danger. In December 2018, aged just 9 months old, a child protection plan was implemented by Wandsworth Social Services because of existing concerns about his biological father due to emotional abuse, implying that he was either subjected to threat, neglect, degrading acts, or being exposed to domestic violence or drug taking. What Jacob needed was a role model and a protector. But in the months before his death, what he got was Jake. The similarities between their names are a pure coincidence. But Louise had known Jake since 2006, when as two families with hard and difficult upbringings, they lived in the same bed and breakfast in Putney. In June 2019, they connected via Facebook. Jake said,
"She messaged me about bringing her a joint."
And as a recently separated father of 2 girls who worked in a local nursery, Louise said, "He was nice." Jake Anthony Drummond was born months and streets apart from Louise, but was a far from suitable father, having never really worked. He was sometimes a painter, a decorator, a plumber's apprentice, and briefly a nursery caretaker until he was sacked for heavy drinking. But mostly he was unemployed. Since the age of 11, he'd used cannabis and cocaine, he claimed,
to deal with my personal problems.
And had a short history of violence, including a juvenile warning in 2005 for holding a knife against his mother's throat, and in 2008 when he assaulted an ex-girlfriend by strangling her until she passed out. 2013, age 23, saw a new beginning in his life when he got together with Julie Sanders, an unmarried mother of 5 boys, and in 2014 and 2016 they had 2 daughters together. He recalled in court,
"I loved it. I always wanted to be a dad, so it was nice to have a big family. I would change nappies, help bathe them, put them both to bed."
And as one of his daughters was fragile, having been born with medical issues,
I'd lay on the floor holding her hand while she slept. Anyone who hurts a child, I think they're disgusting. I would never hurt a child. Never.
But the same can't be said for their mothers. Julie stated that Jake's violence began early in their relationship. He was jealous, possessive, and even though he told Louise that he had broken up with his ex back in February 2019 after one of her sons had accidentally killed one of his daughter's guinea pigs by knocking the cage onto it, in truth, he was cheating on them both. Jake only saw Louise, he said, as a friend with benefits. But Julie was the woman he still wanted. By July 2019, having found out he was cheating on her, Julie sent angry messages to Louise. Like a set of tumbling dominoes, Jake lost his job at the nursery. Julie banned him from seeing his daughters and later any video calls. And owing to his obsessiveness, she reported him to the police for harassment. That month, Jake moved into Louise's flat at Woking Close in Roehampton. Within days, the abuse of Jake had begun, and within weeks, her son would be dead. As it happened before, even though Jake was cheating on Julie with Louise, as cheaters always do, he couldn't believe that anyone could be faithful, so he assumed that they were both cheating on him. Louise said, "After my birthday in early August, I told him I was going out." And after that, he started to block the numbers in her phone's contact list of ex-boyfriends, men friends, and anyone he didn't trust. With his life spiraling out of control, she said, "He seemed more agitated and aggressive. He was taking more drugs. He wasn't sleeping." And on more than one occasion, she said he pinned her down and assaulted her. And although she still sent him loving messages, she claimed, "That was my way of keeping him sweet, keeping him happy. I didn't want him to get aggressive. I was very intimidated by him. I was scared. When I was with him, it was hard. I didn't know how to get away." But Jake always denied that he ever assaulted Jacob, stating,
"I would never hurt a child. Never."
In court, Jake claimed,
"I'm not to blame for it. I didn't touch him."
Denying that he blamed Jake for losing him his job at the Mr. Sheen factory.
"Because he'd been playing with my phone, so I missed a call asking me to come in."
Even though he'd slept in as his drink and drug use had increased. And again, implying that Louise was a bad mother.
"I asked her to seek medical attention for Jacob, but she refused."
Jake's first alibi was to lay the blame on 15-month-old Jacob for what would become his own death.
At first, he was okay with me. Then he seemed to be jealous that I was getting close to Louise. He had a few bad habits he picked up from his brother, slapping his mum and screaming at her, stuff like that.
As many abusers do, he claimed Jacob was clumsy.
"I heard a bang and a cry, and Jacob was on the floor next to his brother's bed, crying. I picked him up, gave him his dummy, a cuddle, and then put him back into bed."
He claimed that, like many toddlers, Jacob was accident-prone. When that month, Louise sent Jake a photo of him with a severe burn to his scalp, having rubbed Veet hair removal cream apparently on his own head. Something that the prosecution said was a malicious act of cruelty by Jake, which he flatly denied. He also claimed in defense of himself,
"I've seen him in a temper tantrum, hitting his head on the floor. He'd have red marks all over his head, and then the next day, little bruises."
But of course, when it didn't seem feasible to blame a tiny toddler for his own self-abuse, there were always others that Jake could blame.
"I'd seen Jacob's brother lash out a few times. I'd seen him punch him in the face and slap him."
And of course, as a self-proclaimed good dad, and with Louise being a negligent mum, he said,
"She turned it into a big joke. She'd pick up Jacob's hands and use them to punch his brother. I never saw Jacob's brother told off. On one occasion, his brother had kicked him and cut his lip. I said she needed to take him to the doctors, but she said, 'No, it's fine. I'll just put some Savlon on it.'"
In Louise's defense, it was claimed she was coercively controlled by Jake, her abusive boyfriend. That she was extremely fearful of reporting Jacob's bruises, as social services had him under a child protection plan. And with the prosecution stating that she'd prioritized her relationship over her own son's welfare. There was some truth to the claims that she was a bad and manipulative mother. Jake stated he was a good surrogate dad to her boys.
"I got on really, really well with Jacob's brother. He came out of his shell a lot. He used to call me Buddy.
but he also stated that Louise was lacking as a mother.
He was still wearing nappies day and night at 4 years old. She said it was because he liked to wear them, and it's easier if he wears nappies, then I don't have to keep taking him to the toilet.
Also stating,
she'd let them go to sleep at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't think it was right. They'd sleep when they finally fell asleep, and she'd do them dinner at odd times. Sometimes it would be very, very late.
Jake and Louise's priority was always themselves, but also the vast amount of drugs that they both consumed. With it said, they smoked 15 joints and spent £120 a day on cocaine and cannabis. In fact, in his autopsy, both drugs were found in 15-month-old Jacob's system, whether by accidental or deliberate ingestion. On the 16th of August 2019, just 11 days before his death, Louise claimed she woke to find Jake in her son's room, a large bruise on Jacob's forehead, and her boyfriend claiming
he fell out of bed.
Again on the 20th, 1 week before, she said Jake had awoken to find Jacob banging his head against the floor. In court, her lawyer stated,
Louise had been deceived and was the victim of Jake's violent and sadistic behaviour.
Which of course Jacob's lawyer refuted, claiming that even though he had anger management problems, there was no evidence of his gratification or glee at harming Jacob. They accused each other when a hefty custodial sentence was dangled in front of them. But a web of lies had been concocted by them both to hide the truth, that together they willingly abused Jacob. On the 20th of August, the day that Jacob supposedly bruised his whole forehead by headbutting the floor, a social worker arrived at the flat for a routine visit, only to receive a text by Louise stating, "Sorry, we're in Hastings." The prosecutor said this was a deliberate lie to stop the social worker from seeing Jacob's bruising and making it clear that they both were putting themselves over Jacob's safety. With his bruises still visible, a visit was rearranged for the 23rd of August. But again, Louise postponed it. Yet when Sharon Kane, a family friend, visited her that day, she recalled, "Jacob's head looked like a basketball, and his eyes were so swollen he could hardly see." Said to be extremely shocked by Jacob's face, Louise then lied to her, claimed he'd fallen out of bed, that she'd taken him to hospital, and that he'd been given the all clear. The judge, Mr. Justice Sweeting, said,
Perhaps the most haunting photograph is not one that shows injury, but that taken on the 12th of August when Jacob appears well. But less than a fortnight later, he was dead.
Jake and Louise were every child's nightmare. Not just one bad parent, but two. He had no one to protect him, as being so focused on their own needs, they saw his torture as little more than a game. On the day that the social worker was told, "Sorry, we're in Hastings," Louise texted a photo of her posing with Jacob, whose face was so bruised, it was said the toddler looked like a panda. With a baseball cap to cover the bruises, she joked, "He looks like a little madman. Lol. Sure he'll be okay by Friday," when the next visit from social services was planned. At which Jake replied, with fingers crossed and laughing emojis. Callously, they often joked using a meme from the film Happy Gilmore with the phrase, "Now you will go to sleep, or I will put you to sleep." And on the 22nd of August, just 5 days before his murder, Jake sent Louise a text saying he was putting the toddler into his bedroom, which he referred to as the torture chamber. This was how they got their kicks, by torturing a young and defenseless child. But the bruises to his face and body weren't the worst of his injuries. At his autopsy, one of a catalogue of sadistic assaults the 15-month-old Jacob Lennon had endured was a gaping 3-centimetre long laceration on the surface of his penis, consistent with extreme pinching or biting, and a penetrating injury to his scrotum, which was as a result of a semi-sharp or sharp object, such as a small blade or a skewer, later believed to be a plastic knife in the shape of Toy Story's Mr. Potato Head. Jake denied it was him, repeating that he would never harm a child, and that
I would never change a nappy that was not my own child's,
implying that he never saw or had any reason to see the injury. Louise also claimed that she never saw it. But how could she miss it when every day she'd have changed Jacob's nappy? Monday the 26th of August 2019 had been a melting pot of bubbling tensions. As the sun was baking hot, the flat was impossible to cool. The social worker had been fobbed off for a third time, and Jake was cautioned by the police for harassing Julie. Jake later pleaded,
I was very upset I was not seeing my daughters. I actually cried because I was missing them. Just looking at their pictures really got me.
According to him,
Louise made my favourite, a sausage casserole, because of the day I'd had. Jacob was on the sofa in a nappy, with a cold compress on his head. He seemed like he was in and out of sleep. Louise was sat next to him smoking a spliff.
And as part of his so-called coping mechanism for his issues, that night, Jake went out partying with a friend, drinking, taking cocaine, and smoking weed.
I got back about 2 a.m, and then I went to bed not long after that.
4 hours later,
I woke up about 6 a.m. I heard a bang and a little squeal. When I jumped up, Louise was awake, wide awake. It's my parents' instinct. When you hear a bang, you run and check on him. It was a whingy squeal, the type that would scare you, like you'd wake up and you'd think, oh, that doesn't sound right.
And that's when Jake said,
I started seeing his lips turn blue, and he wasn't breathing.
Dispatchers received the call at 6:02 a.m. and Louise said,
He's been like this for about 5 or 10 minutes.
But that was all a cruel lie by two evil parents who put their own needs over those of a defenseless boy. At 1 a.m, an hour before Jake said he went to bed, he was up and as usual he was high, pacing the small flat with his phone in his hand and unable to sleep owing to a cocktail of drugs in his system. With Jacob still struggling with a fever in this hot weather, the pain from his bruises, and possibly because of an infection in his scrotum, he wasn't in his cot but sharing the bed with his mum, Louise. Ranting, stressing and obsessing about his ex-partner Julie, as baby Jacob wriggled in the bed and his pained cries split their ears. The jury heard,
It is clear that at some stage during the night, someone must have taken him out of the bed and the room.
And that someone, the Crown said, was Jake Drummond. Forcibly yanking the wailing tot as it dangled from Jake's arm, the more this so-called good dad got frustrated with the child's screams, the more he shook him. Being scared, Jacob cried louder, hoping that his mother would be there to defend him, but she wasn't. And as Jake snapped, having slapped and punched the child, as its screams only got louder, it was then that, like a broken ragdoll, Jake grabbed the boy by either his romper suit or his arm and slammed him hard onto the bedroom floor. Dr. Nat Carey, the pathologist, confirmed.
Jacob was thrown to the ground with such force, his injuries were consistent with being hurled from a first-floor window or being hit by a car at high speed.
Based on the formation of bruises and the clots in his brain, this violent assault had rendered the boy senseless. And although he lay there silent and still, with the first call to the emergency services not being made until 6:02 a.m, the expert clarified,
He'd probably been unconscious for 5 hours.
But again, Jacob's injuries weren't attended to, and they didn't call for an ambulance until it was too late, possibly around the time that they realized he would never wake up, as his brain and body bled. Louise and Jake both claimed that they were fast asleep until they heard the baby fall at around 6 a.m. This was a lie to protect themselves, and they didn't seem too concerned with his dying state. As later that night, Jake downloaded a game onto his phone, but his main focus or obsession was Julie. Jealous that she was supposedly seeing someone else, from 2 a.m. to 3:38 a.m. He texted her several times, with the final message at 5:16 a.m. reading,
"Wonder who you were talking to at 3:30 a.m.
all while Jacob lay silently in a pool of his own vomit, as his brain had swelled, causing nausea. In court, Jake denied this, and implied,
"The texts were sent before I went to bed, but were received later because of a bad signal."
As for Louise, she claimed she slept through all of it, even though she admitted she was a light sleeper. But when the prosecution prodded her,
"Surely a mother is attuned to the cries of her baby."
she had to agree. They did nothing to save him, even less to protect him, and realizing he was either dead or dying, to protect themselves, they concocted a story before phoning the ambulance. Only their alibi was flawed. Jake told the police,
"I woke up about 6 a.m.
5 hours after the assault,
Louise was wide awake."
only having failed to hear her baby's screams. She said,
I woke as Jake ran into the room holding Jacob.
which contradicts him. As we know, the baby didn't or couldn't cry, just as he couldn't move. And although Jake said,
"I started seeing his lips turn blue."
when the paramedics arrived just 7 minutes later, Jacob was barely alive. Together, they blamed his injuries on his clumsiness getting out of his cot, a severe burn to his scalp on him playing with hair removal cream, other bruises having fallen in the street either 5 or 13 days before, 2 horrific injuries to his penis using a knife, a hand or teeth on Jacob's 4-year-old brother. And when the paramedics arrived, Jake made himself sound like the hero.
"The 10 minutes I was giving him CPR felt like a lifetime."
But with the toddler being found limp, cold and still, it's possible that the CPR never happened. Even before his death at 7:22 a.m., it was clear to the pediatric doctors that Jacob had been violently assaulted, as there were 20 fresh bruises to his face and neck, 11 to his arms, 7 to his legs, and 7 to his torso. His head was so swollen that the skull was soft and spongy. His bruised eyes were too puffy to open. A hemorrhage had constricted his spinal nerve, and a neurologist later confirmed that some of the clots were formed 48 hours before his death, meaning his devastating head injury wasn't the first that weekend. And although they turned on each other, Louise and Jake were arrested as the only suspects. With the trial delayed until February 2023 owing to the COVID pandemic, Louise Jane Lennon and Jake Anthony Drummond were tried at the Old Bailey before Mr. Justice Sweeting. She denied causing and allowing a child's death and cruelty, and he denied grievous bodily harm with intent and murder. Throughout the trial, he denied responsibility for Jacob's injuries, and Louise also claimed that she was coerced and threatened by her abusive boyfriend. Alibis and lies flew back and forth, but the jury saw through it, as both of them lacked any remorse. On Thursday the 16th of March 2023, the jury began their deliberation, and having concluded the next day, they returned with a verdict. For the charges of child cruelty and causing or allowing Jacob's death, the latter she admitted to. On the 26th of May, Louise Lennon was found guilty and sentenced to 10 years and 6 months in prison to run concurrently. Jake Drummond was found guilty of wounding with intent and sentenced to 6 years. and guilty of the willful murder of Jacob Lennon, he must serve a minimum of 32 years before parole is even considered. Summing up, Detective Chief Inspector Wayne Jolly described the cases.
By far one of the most difficult, the most sad of my 30-year career. No one who has listened to this catalogue of injuries inflicted on Jacob can be anything but horrified. It's hard to comprehend how such a young and vulnerable baby could have been so abused
by these two parents who were truly every child's nightmare.